Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UCLA Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Grand Rounds. It's my pleasure and privilege to be introducing our speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson, today. Dr. Laugeson is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Biobehavioral and Human Behavior. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, and Dr. Laugeson is the founder and director of the UCLA Peers Clinic, which is an outpatient hospital-based program providing parent-assisted social skills training for individuals with autism spectrum disorder and other social impairments from preschool through adulthood. She is also the interim director of the UCLA Tarjan Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and the program director for dissemination, outreach, and education at the prestigious UCLA Autism Center of Excellence. As the developer of Peers, Dr. Laugeson has trained thousands of mental health professionals, educators, and families worldwide, and she's dedicated to developing and testing evidence-based treatments to improve social skills across the lifespan and across the globe. As one of the only empirically supported and internationally recognized social skills programs for youth with autism and other social challenges, her program is currently used in over 125 countries and has been translated into over a dozen different languages. In addition, Dr. Liz, as she's known by her peers' families, is an incredible mentor, supporting the professional development of the many trainees who have been under her mentorship, including myself. We look forward to her talk entitled Social Skills in a Socially Distant World, Telehealth Practices and Outcomes from the UCLA Peers Clinic. As a reminder to our attendees, throughout the talk, you may enter your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for Dr. Laugeson to respond to during our Q&A portion at the end. And with that, let's welcome our speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jasper Estevillo, for that very, very kind introduction. That was very sweet. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually. I'm very excited to share with you some of our telehealth practices and outcomes from the UCLA Peers Clinic in the context of, how do we teach social skills in a socially distant world? So hopefully I'll be able to give you some tools today to help with that. Before I begin, I do want to mention that I do have a conflict of interest in that I receive book royalties from the sales of my books and manuals from Taylor and Francis and Wiley and Sons. So I think it's important to mention. I want to give you a quick overview of what I'm hoping to share with you over the next hour. I want to begin with just talking about the importance of friendships, because that's what we often target in a lot of our social skills programs. And also related to that, the consequences of things like peer rejection and social isolation, particularly the impact of social isolation during COVID-19. I'll give you a little overview of the Peers curricula, also the methods that we use for teaching social skills and how we had to modify those during COVID-19 for telehealth practices. And then I'll give you an overview of some of the intervention strategies that we teach in Peers, particularly related to friendships in the areas of things like finding friends and starting conversations with people both in person and also online. And also give you a little glimpse of some of the skills that we teach in our dating curriculum, in particular things like how to find people to date, and also how to either make contact with people if you're doing online dating, or even ask someone out on a date in person. And then we'll end with giving you some of our telehealth outcomes that are fresh off the presses, and also give you some resources for moving forward. So, for those of you that know anything about Peers, you know that in many of our programs, we do target friendship skills, not all of our programs, but that's what we're known for, as our flagship programs are focused on making and keeping friends and handling conflict and rejection. So why is this so important? Well, we know just from decades of research that just having one or two close friends is very predictive of later adjustment in life, and actually really buffers the impact of stressful life events, things like, a global pandemic, perhaps. We also know that just having one or two close friends is correlated with things like self-esteem and independence. You feel better about yourself if you have a couple of close friends, and you're more likely to live independently, ultimately, if you just have a couple of close friends. And maybe even most important of all is that we know that just simply having one or two close friends is negatively correlated with things like depression and anxiety, right? You're less likely to be depressed and anxious if you just have a couple of close friends. And to me, one of the things I love about social skills training is, to me, it's sort of like a different approach to dealing with mental health problems. It's just this positive, proactive approach to dealing with things like anxiety and depression. On the other hand, though, peer rejection and even social isolation to a certain extent is a very, very strong predictor of things like depression and anxiety, particularly during adolescence. So if you want to predict who's going to be depressed or anxious later in life, go into a typical middle school or high school, at least in North America, and look for the kids who are being rejected. And that's going to be one of the strongest predictors. We also know that peer rejection is a strong predictor of things like low self-esteem, substance abuse, early withdrawal from school and poor academic performance, as well as things like suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So really, really significant impacts, really possibly resulting from rejection. Now, there was a meta-analysis that recently came out that looked at the impact of social isolation and loneliness on the mental health of children and adolescents during COVID-19. And in this meta-analysis, they surveyed 80 studies. Of those studies, 63 of them reported on the impact of social isolation and loneliness on the mental health of previously healthy children. And adolescents. Now, the average age in the study for this meta-analysis was about 15. And what they found was that children and adolescents are more likely to experience high rates of depression and anxiety during and after enforced isolation, like what we've seen through COVID. But what was interesting is the duration of the loneliness was more strongly correlated with mental health symptoms than the actual intensity of the isolation. So really what this study was sort of showing was that clinical services really need to offer preventative support and intervention to decrease social isolation and also to treat the increase in mental health, conditions that are related to social isolation and loneliness that have really been a result of COVID-19. So this is sort of where our program comes in. If you know anything about peers, you know that we've been around for a while here at UCLA. The program was originally developed at UCLA back in 2004. And at the time, we were focused primarily on adolescents on the autism spectrum, but this program has expanded a lot over the years. And now we work with kids with all kinds of mental health conditions or social challenges. We work with a lot of kids with ADHD or depression, anxiety, really anyone that's sort of struggling socially that wants to learn the skills that we're teaching and they're sort of motivated. At present, the program has been translated in finding and obtaining employment and maintaining employment. It's called Peers for Careers, and also Peers for Dating, which is what it sounds like. It's a curriculum focused on helping young adults on the autism spectrum develop and maintain romantic relationships. So a number of studies that we're working on right now that I'll share with you later. But really what makes our curricula so different than other social skills programs is that they're evidence-based. So we have a lot of research to support the efficacy and effectiveness of peers. There's over 40 research papers published on the program in various parts of the world. It's parent or caregiver assisted typically. So we have social coaches that go through the program in tandem with our participants. We're only teaching ecologically valid social skills in this program. So we're not even just collecting research on what's working in our program, but also in the development of the program, we're trying to only include skills that socially successful people are naturally doing rather than just what we think people should do in social situations. And as I mentioned, another unique aspect of our program is that it's cross-culturally adapted and validated across the globe. Now, in terms of how we teach social skills, this is very important. I think it's not just important what we teach, but also how we teach social skills. So we use a small group format, typically about 10 to 12 socially motivated young people, right? They have to say they want to be there in order to be in our programs. I don't think it's really ethical to force social skills onto people that don't want to learn them. So that's an important part of our screening process. We have didactic lessons with very concrete rules and steps of social behavior. Everything's broken down into these rules and steps that's all based on ecologically valid social skills. And we use a very Socratic method of teaching. So we're not lecturing to our participants, we're actually engaging them in the process of developing and creating these rules and steps of social behavior. We do a lot of role play demonstrations, right? It's not just enough to talk about social skills, but you have to see what they look like and also what they shouldn't look like. So we actually show appropriate and inappropriate examples of social behavior. We do a lot of perspective taking around those role plays to kind of get into the mind of other people, kind of improve our social cognition. We also do a lot of behavioral rehearsal activities. This is where our participants are now practicing the newly learned skills, and then we're hopefully giving them a little, support in the process, a little social coaching with performance feedback. And then in order to generalize the skills out into sort of the real world, we give homework assignments. So this is related to practicing the skills in more natural social settings. This is generalizing the skills, and hopefully there's some sort of parent involvement, caregiver involvement, or in some of our other programs, it might be sort of a peer coach that's providing coaching out in the real world. Now, the way that the methods that we use for teaching the skills are slightly different for in-person versus telehealth is we still have it as the 16-week curriculum. They're 90-minute weekly lessons, but for telehealth, of course, everything is provided over Zoom. And we have these concurrent, teen or young adult or parent groups essentially happening in different places, but simultaneously. In terms of the content is the same with the exception that for telehealth, we've added new content related to online social skills. A lot of kids are having more online get-togethers. They're joining online meetup groups. There's more things happening virtually. So we need to have more online social skills in our curriculum. We also, rather than doing live in-person role plays, which is what we normally do in our in-person groups, we actually show video role play demonstrations of the targeted social skills in our telehealth groups. Now, we also want to make sure that all of our young people are practicing the skills in our groups. So we normally do that during these small group sort of behavioral rehearsal activities in person, but over Zoom, these are done in small virtual breakout rooms over Zoom. And then finally, the assignments are pretty similar with the exception that because, so many of our kids, particularly at the beginning of COVID, were so socially isolated. There weren't a lot of social activities happening online for them that we added a new assignment where they could have this in-group get-together where we would assign, 2 group members to have an online get-together where they could practice some of their skills. Normally, if you know anything about our program, we don't allow fraternization during the program. So this was kind of a big departure for us, but I think has worked out actually quite nicely during COVID. So now I want to get to the fun part, right? I want to share with you some of the skills that we teach in peers. And I wanted to begin with talking about friendships. So one of the common, things that we share with our kids right away is that friendships really are based on common interests, right? That's like the key to friendships is that, think about who you're friends with or who you've been friends with. You probably have things in common with them. And those are the things you talk about with your friends. Those are the things that you do with your friends. And so really, because common interests are so important to friendships, it's really important to find a potential kind of pool of potential friends based on these common interests. So a lot of kids will do things like they'll join different social activities to meet other people with common interests. So what are some of the social activities that people will join to find potential friends? Well, they'll join extracurriculars at school or in the community. There's often, school clubs or even work clubs. Community clubs, there's maybe sports leagues if you're interested in sports. People meet friends, of course, through work and school and maybe volunteer programs. Meetup groups are very common, particularly for adults, but online meetup groups have become very common during COVID-19. And so again, online groups and meetup groups are very similar to in-person groups. They're based on common interests. If I'm really into video games, I might join a gaming club. If I'm really into technology and computers, I might join like a tech club or a computer club. If I'm into science, and so forth, join a science club, go to science camp. So we really need to think about what are our kids' interests? Where can we find other people with those same interests? Well, where do you do this during a global pandemic, right? It got a little bit complicated back in March of 2020. And so basically, what we found is that a lot of our kids were doing things like joining OutSchool classes, for example. So if you don't know OutSchool, this is just one of many options, but they offer online groups for kids K through 12. And they have traditional subjects like, math and science. They have pop culture topics too, though, like Dungeons and Dragons and Stranger Things, Wings of Fire. They have a lot of STEM classes. So a lot of kids on the spectrum we found really enjoy STEM classes. And so they were finding friends through those activities, things like coding and engineering, maybe even gaming, video game design. And then they also have enrichment activities. hobbies, things like, cooking and dance, art, yoga, meditation, really cool stuff. So that's OutSchool. That does have a fee attached to it. So that wasn't really a good fit for all of our families. But what also happened was that there's this website called meetup.com. Some of you may have known of this before COVID. And really it was focused on adults primarily. But during COVID, that changed a little bit and they started having more adolescent online meetup groups. And this is actually a free service that you can just sign up for. You put in, your address, normally it's a certain mile radius that you're willing to go, right? Because people would meet in person and then you put in your interest. But with COVID, everything was sort of being done online. And so there's lots of fun meetup groups for kids, right? There's movie meetups and gaming meetups, anime meetups for people who are into sports. They would have like kind of sports fans meetups and that sort of thing. And so this was a really great source of, finding potential sources of friends based on common interest. That took a little while to kind of gear up during COVID. Really, again, this service typically had focused on adults. I think people felt it wasn't that safe for kids to meet up in person through the service, but online is a whole different situation. So let's imagine that we have our kids going to these different meetup groups wherever they happen to be, whether they're in person or virtual. We have to talk to people in these situations. So how do you do that? Well, what's interesting is I mentioned the importance of ecologically valid social skills. Well, this is a really good example of where very well-intentioned adults will sometimes give kids really bad advice. And so think about this. What do most adults tell kids to do to meet new people? Like imagine they're going to one of these new meetup groups. They haven't met anyone before. What are they told to go up and do? Well, they're told to go up and say hi or go up and introduce themselves. Well, have you ever thought about what that would look like? Right? Just imagine that I walked up to you if we were in person and just, interrupted your group conversation and said, "Hi, I'm Liz." Right? I mean, what would you think of me? You would think I was weird, right? That's not a normal thing to do. That's actually kind of intrusive. And so that's not actually what people do to meet new people. So instead, we want to teach the ecologically valid social skills for meeting new people and entering group conversations. But as I mentioned, in peers, we have a certain formula for teaching social skills. I went through those methods of instruction and I mentioned role plays, big part of our program, but we also show not just good examples, but also, bad examples, inappropriate examples, because these are kind of the common social errors that a lot of our kids might make. So I'm going to show you a role play video. And in a moment, you're going to see someone enter the screen and her name is Alina. I want you to watch this role play. Think about what Alina is doing wrong here in entering this group conversation.
Hey Jordan, you'll never guess. I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
No way, what restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to try that place.
Yeah,
it's so close by. I felt bad that I'd never gone, but I went and it was so good.
Nice. What did you guys get?
I got the spicy tuna with crispy rice.
Yeah, it looked awesome.
Have you guys ever been roller skating?
Sorry, I just got the regular salmon.
There's this new skate park that just opened up. It's really fun.
What did you get?
Just the salmon roll. It was plain, but
They have
so
a Thursday night student night. A lot of people go to it.
I've been meaning to go there. I really
Yeah.
wanted to try it out.
It's really fun. There's also this other place
What would you
by the
get if
beach
you went?
that I've been roller skating.
I'm sorry, what?
What would you get if you went?
It's really cool. It's like right by the water and lots of people go.
Okay, so we would time out. We'd ask, what did Alina do wrong there? And, it was so over the top. Our teens or our young adults, they'll tell us, well, she just kind of barged into the conversation, right? She was very off topic. And then we would do some perspective taking, right? So what was that like for the group? It was probably kind of annoying, right? Kind of obnoxious. What do they think of Alina? She's kind of weird, right? Kind of annoying. And would they want to talk to her again? Probably not. So this is not how we meet new people, just barging into conversations and sort of being off topic. It's also not going up and saying hi and introducing ourselves. So instead, what most people kind of naturally do to enter group conversations is they first sort of listen to the conversation from a distance, kind of watch from a distance. And really what they're trying to do is kind of figure out the topic. But, they want to watch and listen, but they don't want to look like they're sort of eavesdropping, even though that's what they're doing. So people will use like a prop, like maybe it's a cell phone or, gaming device, reading material or something, but they want to look distracted as they're sort of listening to this conversation, and they're identifying the topic. And you really should know something about the topic if you're going to join, right? You shouldn't join on a topic you don't know anything about because you're just going to slow that conversation down. So you definitely have to find some kind of common interest. And then assuming you find the common interest, you're not going to just yell from across the room, right? You're going to move a little bit closer, and you don't want to barge into the conversation, right? So you're going to wait for a little pause in the conversation, and then you're going to mention the topic. And you do that in one of three ways. You can either make a comment, you can ask a question, or you can give a compliment. That's typically what people do. And then right away, you need to start assessing their interest, right? You can tell pretty quickly if you're accepted into a conversation. Well, here's what's interesting. When I ask people, how can you tell if somebody wants to talk to you or a group of people want to talk to you? Most people will say it's a feeling that you get. But you know what? In reality, there are concrete behaviors that are giving you that feeling, right? So what are they doing with their eyes if they want to talk to you? They're looking at you, right? And not rolling their eyes or making a face. What are they doing with their body? They're facing you, right? Not giving you the cold shoulder, kind of turning away. And they're actually talking to you and not making sort of, short replies or rude comments. Another thing happens too in groups is that, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but people, when they talk in groups, they kind of talk in a circle, right? What do they do with the circle if they want to talk to you? They sort of open the circle, right? What do they do with the circle if they don't want to talk to you? Close the circle. So we use language like that, but we break those behaviors down so that it's easier to assess that interest as we're looking for those concrete behaviors. Now, assuming the group wants to talk to us, then if we've never met them before, then we can introduce ourselves, but this doesn't happen right away. This is later, if at all. So now we want to show the good example of what this is supposed to look like. So watch this role play and think about what Alina is doing right this time in entering this group conversation.
So Jordan, you'll never guess I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
Nice. What restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to check that place out.
Yeah, it's so close by and I'd never gone, but I went. It was really good.
Cool. What did you guys get?
I got a spicy tuna roll and I loved it.
You got the spicy tuna roll? That's what I always get.
Yeah, how good is it?
It's so good there. Have you guys tried the rainbow roll there?
I haven't. No, I actually got the salmon roll.
Oh, okay, that's good too. But
Yeah.
the rainbow rolls is their specialty.
I'll try it.
Yeah,
If you were gonna go, what'd you get?
Probably the California roll. It's my favorite.
I've tried that one there actually. It's really good.
Nice.
Okay, so then we would time out. We'd ask, what did Alina do right there? Go through the steps that she just followed, and then do a little perspective taking. What was that like for the group this time? It was nice, right? It was pleasant. What they think of Alina this time? She seemed nice, right? She seemed friendly. Would they want to talk to her again? I mean, probably. This is how we meet new people, right? It's not by going up and saying hi and introducing ourselves. It's actually by entering conversations. But now imagine how this is done online, right? This is going to be a little bit different. There's no moving closer. There's all these different, aspects to entering an online conversation. Imagine those kids that go to those online meetup groups. How are they going to talk to people in this context? Well, once again, we're going to teach this skill using the inappropriate example first. So watch this role play and think about what Alina is doing wrong in entering this online group conversation.
Ainsley, how was your weekend?
Hi, Elizabeth. It was good. How was yours?
It was really good. I went on this new hike up in Topanga Canyon. Have you ever been?
No, I haven't. How was it?
You guys go salsa
Oh.
dancing?
I'm sorry.
My mom goes salsa dancing all the time and she's really good, but she always invites me and I don't want to go. It's so fun.
Anyway, Ainsley, I was saying it was just so
She goes salsa dancing like in the park and on the beach, and it's really funny because she's actually really good, but I don't want to go on her private lessons with her. She always tries to make me go.
Anyway, so Ainsley, I was saying it was just such a beautiful.
So funny
hike.
watching her though. It's so awesome. Like she's actually really, really good.
Okay, so we would time out. We'd say, what did Alina do wrong there? I mean, again, she sort of barged into this conversation. She was off topic, right? And did it seem like they wanted to talk to her? No, right? And what was it like for that group? Well, it was annoying, right? It was frustrating. What do they think of Alina? She's kind of weird, kind of obnoxious. Would they want to talk to her again after that? No. So instead, we want to teach the skills that people will often naturally follow for entering online group conversations. And they're very similar to in-person with some slight differences. First, we're going to start with watching and listening the conversation and trying to identify the topic, right? You're trying to find a common interest. We don't need a prop this time, right? Because it's online. Now, of course, if we find this common interest, we do want to enter, but we're not going to have to move closer. That's different here. But we still have to wait for a pause in the conversation. And there's never a perfect pause, but best time to join is when one person stops talking and another person is starting to talk. And then you're going to mention the topic, right? You do that by either making a comment or asking a question, giving a compliment. And you really have to start assessing their interest pretty quickly. But assessing interest online is different than in person, right? So how can you tell if they want to talk to you online? Well, are they attending to you? Are they talking to you? There's no turning towards you and the eye contact is all very different, but are they attending to you? Are they talking to you? And then if things are going well and you've never met them before, then you can introduce yourself. All right, so let's watch this role play. Think about what Aline is doing right this time and entering this online group conversation.
Hi, Ainsley. How was your weekend?
Hi, Elizabeth. It was good. How was yours?
It was really good. I checked out this new hike in Topanga Canyon. It was so beautiful.
You went to Topanga Canyon? Was that the hike with the waterfall?
Yeah, there is a waterfall there. Have you been?
I haven't been, but I've heard so much about that hike.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. What about you, Ainsley? Have you ever been?
I haven't been yet, but I've heard really good things too.
Is the hike an easy one or is it a little harder?
I would say it's moderate, but it was still a really good workout.
I definitely want to check it out.
You definitely should. It's a great one.
By the way, I'm Alina.
Oh, it's nice to meet you, Alina. I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Ainsley. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you both.
All right, so then we time out. We ask, what did Alina do wrong? We go through the steps and do some perspective taking. So again, we have to prepare our kids if they're going to be meeting potential friends online through these online meetup groups in this very strange kind of socially distant world right now. We need to prepare them for how to do that. And it's different than in person. All right, the other skills that I wanted to share with you relate to dating. And so we do have a dating curriculum. Our young adult program has 4 sessions on dating etiquette, but we also have a randomized control trial right now with a 16-week curriculum on dating etiquette. And, one of the common questions that comes up in these programs is where do you find romantic partners, people to date? Well, this is sort of interesting. So they've done research on this over the years. And this is sort of fascinating research where they followed heterosexual couples between 1940 up until 2010. And then also same-sex couples from 1980 to 2010. And they found for heterosexual couples that the majority of people up until 2010 were finding friends or finding partners through mutual friends, essentially. Also, bars and restaurants were pretty common, as well as online started to become common around 2010, but really was kind of non-existent a couple decades before that. People also find, friends through work, like coworkers, maybe through school, also maybe through their religious, organizations, but definitely through friends was the big one for heterosexual couples. For same-sex couples, you can see that online was much more common. Like it's, far and away the most common way that same-sex couples were meeting, at least up until 2010. And then, things like bars and restaurants, were sort of another option and through friends and all that, but really online was sort of where things were at. Now, if you look at, from 1995 to 2017, you see a big shift. This is for heterosexual couples that online really becomes the most common way that couples meet. Bars and restaurants are still popular and through friends, but really online is sort of, definitely rounding out the most popular methods of finding a potential partner. And then if you look up to 2020, it's definitely far and away online is the way to go. And again, things like friends and bars and restaurants are also kind of in the top 3, but these things change over time. It's sort of interesting. So now think about COVID-19, our whole world has just been sort of turned upside down. How are people meeting? Well, they're meeting online, of course. And it's fortunate that that was already pretty popular. And so there were systems and, apps and things that were developed to help people to meet other people online. But, what are some of the appropriate dating apps that people use? Well, I think we've all heard of, Match and Tinder, OkCupid, Bumble, Hinge. These are all very, very common. If you look at the most popular dating apps prior to COVID, Tinder was by far and away the most popular dating app or website. Bumble and Plenty of Fish were also pretty popular. And then you had things like Match and OkCupid that were sort of rounding out the top 5. But Tinder was definitely the most common prior to COVID-19. Now, when you actually look at dating apps at the beginning of COVID-19, Tinder is still at the very top in terms of downloads. Bumble is pretty common, Plenty of Fish, and Hinge, again, kind of running at the top 4. When you look at dating apps in 2021, Match is back on top again. So it just kind of came from behind there. And Tinder also still very popular, Plenty of Fish, Bumble, OkCupid. But, kind of interesting to sort of think these are the common apps that people are using and also having some success at finding partners with these apps. There's also very population specific dating apps too. So for example, people who are interested in meeting Christian partners might try Christian Mingle. People who are interested in having a Jewish partner might go to JDate or JSwipe. Farmers Only is what it sounds like. Silver Singles is for older adults, and Grindr is for LGBTQ groups. So there's very population specific dating apps. And so not surprising, there's also disability specific dating apps. So there's things like Autism Date, Hiki, Unipi, Aspie Singles. Those are all focused on adults on the autism spectrum, looking for partners on the spectrum. Abled Love is a little bit more general kind of disability groups. And what's interesting about some of these apps, particularly the autism specific dating apps, is that they're not always just focused on dating. They're sometimes about finding a companion or a friend. There's even sometimes gaming options within the app to kind of appeal to that population. But it's important to note that there are disability specific dating apps for people that are looking for other people that are maybe neurodiverse in this case. All right, so how do you make contact with someone on these online dating apps and websites? Well, there's definitely a right and a wrong way of doing that. And just like we do inappropriate role plays, we sometimes show inappropriate examples of what not to do. This would be a good example of what not to do. You wouldn't just reach out with someone and say you want to meet. I mean, that would be a little abrupt, a little too quick. And so that could push the person off, make them kind of uncomfortable and really not be interested in speaking with you or meeting with you. So instead, what people often do is they kind of keep it short and sweet at first when they're first initiating contact. There's usually only a few lines at the most. And they often begin by, either asking a question or making a comment on the person's profile, maybe even giving a specific compliment about something from that person's profile. The thing about compliments, though, is there's sort of a good and a bad way of doing this. A specific compliment is definitely the way to go, rather than a general compliment. A general compliment would be something like, "You're so beautiful," or "You're so handsome." That's coming on kind of strong, right? So instead, a specific compliment would be like, "You have a nice smile," or "You have pretty eyes," or something like that. But we really want to avoid starting with too many physical compliments at first, because that can kind of give the impression that that's all you care about. The other thing too about physical compliments is that they need to be from the neck up. Right? There's not too many compliments that you can give that are physical below the neck that are appropriate. So definitely from the neck up. And this is just kind of an interesting little data that I got from a website that sort of focuses on online dating research, and they found the difference between males and females in this case in terms of what they like to be complimented on. Apparently females are reporting they like to be complimented on their personality most of all, maybe their humor or intelligence, and then maybe body and appearance and success might be kind of rounding up the bottom 5. Males, on the other hand, were saying that they really prefer to be complimented on their body and appearance, primarily their humor, personality, and then intelligence and success kind of rounded out the bottom 5. So I thought that was kind of interesting and wanted to share that with you. But however you go about making contact with someone initially online, you definitely need to mention your common interests, right? When you're making that contact, because just like friendships, romantic relationships are also based on common interest as well as physical attraction. These are the things you're going to talk about with your partner. These are the things you're going to do together. And so this is sort of some research that was published by Tinder from 10,000 of their US Tinder users and their profiles. And what they found was that in terms of interests that were mentioned in profiles, work was the most common. People will mention things like music or travel, maybe the outdoors, their dogs, maybe food or books, movies, kind of adventure things. And these are the things that you can comment on. These are the common interests that you might find with other people. But your first message when you're making contact online really needs to include the following things. You need to include your interest in them, right? You need to give maybe a specific compliment. That would be good, but definitely a conversational bid that's going to keep the conversation going, an open-ended question or something about yourself, a common interest that you share. Make it easy for them to respond, right? That's the conversational bid. There's a lot more that goes into this in terms of asking someone out online, but this is how we sort of initiate our first contact. We definitely don't want to suggest meeting immediately. That could sort of seem desperate, kind of coming on too strong. You might actually scare the person off. So the average time between the first contact and actually a first date, kind of depending on the frequency of that contact, is anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. So it doesn't happen instantly. There's usually a little bit of communication prior to that. Now, imagine it's not a global pandemic and people are meeting in person. How could you ask someone out on a date in person? Because that's very different than online. Well, there's definitely a right and a wrong way of doing this. So let's start with the inappropriate example first. And so in a moment here, you're going to see Alina on the screen again. She's going to be here with Gabe. And I want you to watch this role play and think about what Gabe is doing wrong in asking Alina on a date.
Hi, do you want to go on a date with me?
No.
Come on, just one date. It'll be really fun.
No, I'm good.
But I'm a really nice guy. Can we just go on one date?
No, thank you. I'm okay.
Come on.
Okay, so that is definitely not how you do that, right? What was that like for Alina when Gabe just randomly came up and asked her out on a date? It was probably very uncomfortable, right? Very awkward. What did she think of Gabe? I mean, kind of creepy stalker a little bit, right? Very awkward. And would she want to go out with him or talk to him again after that? Probably not. Now, this was an example of sort of a heterosexual situation, but we don't want to be heterosexist in our groups. So one of the important things that we do in all of our groups is we always make sure that our young adults get to practice in the behavior rehearsal with whoever they feel most comfortable with. So they always have to make sure that we have a male and a female coach, and you don't necessarily have to identify their sexual orientation, but really just identify who they're more comfortable practicing with, so that we're not kind of coming at this from a heterosexist perspective. Also important to teach the skills that you actually should be following, the steps that people follow for asking someone on a date in person. And, of course, the first step is that you have to wait for the appropriate time. So preferably when there's not other people around, right? When other people can overhear, preferably when they, have time to talk and they're not busy or upset about something. And you start by kind of trading information. This is the term that we use for having a good sort of reciprocal conversation. You mentioned your common interests, as you're trading information, and really you should have thought in advance what you want to do on this date. That's part of the planning of, asking someone to date, is thinking about your dating activity options. And so you probably have an idea of something that you want to do. So you mention that. And it should be based, by the way, on common interest, right? Whatever you're going to suggest doing on that date should be a common interest. So you're going to mention that common interest. And then you don't just flat out ask them to go do that activity. Instead, you sort of ask what they're doing at a certain time. So let's say that we decided that we both like, sci-fi movies. We're talking about sci-fi movies. You're not just going to ask the person to go to the sci-fi movie. You're going to say, well, what are you doing this weekend? All right, well, they know where you're going with that. So this is where you get to assess their interest a little bit. And if they say, oh, I'm not doing anything, that's a good sign. You should proceed. If you ask, well, what are you doing this weekend? And they say, oh, I'm kind of busy. That is not a good sign, right? Should you ask them out? No, you're going to abort the mission and you got to save face because you didn't ask them out on a date, right? So that's a very important step, just kind of asking what they're doing at a certain time. All right, assessing their interest. And then if they seem interested, this is where you can use the common interest as sort of a cover story or a reason for going out, right? Maybe we should go see that sci-fi movie together. And then if you don't have their phone number, you'll exchange contact information and you'll let them know when you're going to follow up. So now let's watch a good example of what this is supposed to look like. And so we would introduce this by saying, watch this role play and think about what Gabe is doing right and asking Alina on a date.
Hey, Alina, how are you?
Hey Gabe, I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. What'd you do this weekend?
I just went to go see a movie with some friends.
Oh, was it a sci-fi movie? I remember you telling me you really like sci-fi movies.
Yes, it was a sci-fi movie.
Did you hear about that new one coming out this weekend?
Of course, I totally want to see that.
Me too. It sounds like it's gonna be really, really good.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Well, what are you up to this weekend?
Nothing.
Would you maybe want to go see the movie with me?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Well, can I get your contact information so we can plan it out?
Sure, of course. It's 555-1313.
All right, great. I'll give you a text this weekend. We'll plan it out.
That sounds great.
Awesome.
Okay, so then we time out. We ask, what did Gabe do right? We go through the steps and then perspective taking. I'm hoping you're sort of seeing the formula that we follow for teaching social skills. It's not just important what we're teaching. It's also how we're teaching social skills. And there's a very specific way that we do this, both in person and online. So in terms of just presenting to you some of our telehealth outcomes, I'm very excited to share this data with you. A big thanks to Dr. Jasper Estebillo and Christine Moody and the other members of our team involved with this research in getting this research kind of ready to go just for today's talk. This is actually, hot off the presses, but we looked at telehealth delivery versus in-person groups in our adolescent groups for teens with autism spectrum disorder between the ages of 12 to 17. And we're looking again at archival data from peers in-person groups compared to telehealth groups during COVID-19. We used a combination of measures, including the social responsiveness scale, the social skills improvement system, quality of socialization questionnaire, and the test of adolescent social skills knowledge. Now, the average age in this study was around 14, mostly male. Again, this is youth on the autism spectrum, so that's probably not too surprising. Slightly diverse ethnically. The majority, though, did identify as Caucasian. In terms of the outcomes, the first thing we looked at was just how did telehealth fare, from pre to post test, with in-person, aside, how did they do? Well, there was a significant improvement in social responsiveness on the social responsiveness scale from pre to post test in the telehealth groups. Now, the social responsiveness scale is an autism screening tool. So you want the scores to go down. They use T-scores, and we see here in just 16 weeks, almost a full standard deviation change from just pre to post test. If you look at the social skills improvement system, which is often considered to be kind of the gold standard for assessing social functioning, we're seeing about almost a 10-point standard score improvement in overall social skills. In fact, our teens are going from a below average range to an average range of social skills in our telehealth groups. I would say that this is not just statistically significant. These results are clinically meaningful. These are like almost a standard deviation change in some cases from pre to post test. We're also seeing a nice decrease in problem behaviors in the telehealth groups from pre to post test on the social skills improvement system. Additionally, we're seeing nice improvements in social engagement. So on average, these are get-togethers in the previous month. On average, the teens are reporting almost 5 to 6 additional get-togethers in the previous month. Parents are reporting about 5 additional get-togethers. I do want to note that some of these get-togethers are those planned sort of in-group get-togethers with other members of our group, but other get-togethers are with people unaffiliated with our program. And in terms of things like, social skills knowledge, are they learning the skills that we're teaching them in peers? Again, all of these results are significant, but we're seeing a significant improvement there. So far, so good. Looks like telehealth is actually pretty effective. But then, of course, we want to compare telehealth to our in-person social skills groups. And so the blue here is the telehealth group. The yellow is our in-person groups. And on the left here, we're seeing just kind of the change in scores from pre to post test. And on the right, we're seeing kind of the same information just in a line graph. And what you're noticing here is that they are absolutely comparable. I mean, there's actually 2 lines here on the right. You just can't see the blue. It's hidden by the yellow because that's how comparable those outcomes are. We're seeing this nice, almost full standard deviation improvement on the social responsiveness scale. Remember that this is an autism screening tool, so we want the scores to go down. These are autism symptoms related to social responsiveness. We also saw very nice improvements again on the social skills improvement system, and comparing in-person to telehealth outcomes. Once again, the outcomes are equivalent. They are not significantly different. So we're seeing these nice improvements in both groups. Likewise, when we look at problem behaviors, seeing the same sort of trajectory in terms of outcomes here, nice decrease in problem behaviors in both the telehealth groups and the in-person groups, no significant differences between these outcomes. When we're looking at social engagement on self-report of frequency of get-togethers in the previous month, again, no significant differences between the groups. The telehealth groups are slightly higher than the in-person, just kind of anecdotally, but remember that they're also having these planned in-group get-togethers too in the telehealth groups, where that's not happening at all in the in-person group. So you would sort of expect the telehealth groups to have slightly more social engagement for that reason. And that's actually what we see when we look at parent reports of social engagement, is that both groups are doing quite well, but there actually is now a significant difference in terms of social engagement, frequency of get-togethers in the previous month between telehealth and in-person, but it's not necessarily what you would expect, just not knowing much about how this study was designed, but it's actually the telehealth groups that are more socially engaged than the in-person. And that's really attributed to the fact that we were doing these in-group get-togethers, these online get-togethers with other group members. All right, finally, this is just looking at social skills knowledge, and you can see that both groups, whether it's telehealth or in-person, they're learning the skills in the same way that they're learning them in telehealth versus in-person. So we really find these results very encouraging. We've been going through these, looking at these outcomes for the last year and a half. Many of you have done the same, or at least anecdotally, you probably noticed that telehealth really does seem to be a pretty impactful, very powerful and effective way of teaching certain skills and really managing mental health issues. And so I don't think telehealth is going anywhere, even when hopefully COVID is a distant memory, hopefully. I think it's a really nice way to help people to access services that maybe they wouldn't be able to access otherwise. We have a lot of people Zooming in from different parts of the country, even from different parts of the world, to receive these services, and they might not have been able to do that otherwise. And it's very nice to actually be able to support the notion that this is actually just as effective as in person, according to these results. All right, so I just want to round things out with sharing some of our resources with you so that you can know a little bit about some of the resources that you have access to through the UCLA Peers Clinic. And so we have weekly adolescent telehealth groups. They're on Wednesday evenings. We have 2 back-to-back groups each week. And when it's safe to do so, we will be in person again, but I do believe we'll continue to also have a telehealth option for these groups. We also have groups for young adults. And so these are offered on Mondays. We have 2 back-to-back groups. Again, they're offered right now via Zoom. When it's safe to do so, we will resume our in-person groups. But again, I believe we'll always have this telehealth option moving forward. Because there was such a demand for our programs really across the globe, and we do train thousands of mental health professionals and educators even every month on our program. Not everybody can access a peers program, so a lot of people were wanting to Zoom in to our programs here at UCLA from across the globe, and so we opened up these educational classes that are not through health insurance or anything like that. They're just taught as a class, and so that's also an option for people that may not have access to us normally. And again, we have these for both teens and for young adults on Zoom. We offer those groups on Tuesdays every week. We also have a 5-week intensive dating course that we teach for people who are alumni of peers. This would be open to teens and to young adults that just want to get an intensive, overall kind of view of like dating etiquette in order to develop and maintain romantic relationships. So that's also offered over Zoom. Now, the UCLA Peers for Preschoolers program was our one program that was sort of on hold during COVID initially. because this is a program for kids 3 to 6 years of age, and try to get 3 to 6 year olds to pay attention on Zoom. That's not going to be too effective, unfortunately. So what we did is we more recently resurrected the program to be parent only. And so we have videos that we show the parents of how to coach your kids on certain skills related to making and keeping friends. We have video puppet shows that parents watch with their kids, focused on the different skills that we target in our program. And then parents send in videos to our group each week of them coaching their kids, and we provide feedback. And it's actually anecdotally really appearing to work quite nicely. We are still collecting data, so we'll take a look at that as we collect more and more data, but more to come on that. But very exciting that we're able to offer that program again. We also have 3 different randomized controlled trials right now that people can access. And this is our L-DOPA study. This is a study that we're doing with Dr. Jim McCracken, who of course is our director of our child division. And he had this brilliant idea to combine the drug L-DOPA with social skills training. Now, if you're not familiar with the drug L-DOPA, it's used for Parkinson's patients, and it increases the amount of dopamine in the brain. And of course, dopamine is this natural kind of occurring substance in the brain, a neurotransmitter that is sort of related to feelings of pleasure and reward. And the idea was, well, what if we could make socialization more rewarding, more pleasurable? And so we're comparing the use of L-DOPA versus a placebo in combination with both our teen and our young adult telehealth groups. So if people are interested in that study, please contact us. We're very excited to be enrolling more teens and adults on the autism spectrum. We also have Peers for Careers, which is a study that I'm conducting with Dr. Amanda Gulsrud. It's funded by Autism Speaks. And this is a college to career transition program that teaches the soft skills related to finding and maintaining employment for adults on the autism spectrum. We're also working with employers on creating sort of supportive work environments for neurodiverse employees. And this is a 20-week curriculum, again, available to adults on the autism spectrum. So definitely reach out if you're interested in learning more about Peers for Careers. We also have Peers for Dating, which is a research study, another randomized control trial for adults, again, on the autism spectrum, interested in, finding and developing romantic relationships. It's a 16-week curriculum. All of these programs are offered via Zooms. They're all for telehealth purposes. And again, we're actively recruiting adults in the spectrum. So if you're interested, feel free to get in touch. Prior to COVID, we also had these very intensive 2-day topical boot camps. We had a dating boot camp and a conversation boot camp, a bully proofing boot camp, a friendship boot camp. And they were offered on a Saturday and Sunday from like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And it was this very intensive boot camp teaching a very specific area of social skills. Those were on hold, of course, during COVID because we weren't able to meet up, but we're really hoping to resurrect those programs, hopefully starting in early 2022. So more to come on that. But in the meantime, we also developed a Peers virtual boot camp. It has 35 episodes that are all pre-recorded. They cover all of the skills that we teach in Peers, and you can kind of go at your own pace. It's available through a YouTube channel, and the access never expires. So a lot of our families are actually using this even as a maintenance program for sort of booster sessions. But it's available to anyone that's interested in learning more about the skills we teach in Peers. We also have a number of role play videos on our UCLA Peers Clinic website. This is the QR code. If you want to access some of the videos that you saw today, there's over 100 role play videos on our website. They're free to use for anyone that's interested. And again, this is used obviously in combination with our Peers program, but can be used in other ways as well. This is a book called The Science of Making Friends that I wrote for families that can't access a Peers program, but really want to learn the skills that we teach. It covers all of the skills related to making and keeping friends. And then finally, just want to share our training calendar. So we conduct certified teleconferences multiple times throughout the year. Usually we're doing about 1 or 2 of these trainings every month, but we offer 5 on-site trainings at UCLA throughout the year. There's 2 related to our parent-assisted adolescent program. The next one is coming up this November 3rd through the 5th. This is a teleconference, and so you can just zoom on in from wherever you happen to be. We'll have another one of these certified teleconferences in April for our teen parent-assisted program. We also have a school-based certified training. This is also a teleconference. Will be offered in June of 2022. And then we also offer teleconferences for our caregiver assisted young adult program that focuses not just on friendship skills, but also romantic relationships. And the next Peers for Young Adults certified teleconference will be this February. So definitely reach out if you want more information about that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up, and really want to thank this amazing team that we have at UCLA for all of their really hard work. This is, it takes a village, right, to do this type of work. And we have some really amazing research assistants and, admin support, as well as, great research collaborators and generous funders. And of course, amazing families that participate in this research. So always good to thank them for their support of the work that we do. And also just wanted to end with our contact information. If you want more information about anything you've heard here today, feel free to reach out to us. But I also want to save some time for a little Q&A here. So I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Dr. Jasper Estebillo, who's going to be moderating our Q&A. And I'm wondering, Jasper, do you have any questions for me?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Laugeson, for that wonderful talk. It's such a relevant and timely topic, and I think that that really speaks to why so many people are interested, and so many families have really reached out and tried to participate in these groups over telehealth. I do have a few questions, and I think I'm trying to group the questions and the wonderful questions in the Q&A together. My question is, these results are so promising. We see the lines directly on top of each other. It's kind of comical, right? It's hidden behind each other. But in addition to the peers method of Socratic questioning and really how we're teaching the social skills, what do you think really accounts for why the results are pretty much the exact same? And what do you think is really contributing to such successes in the social skills learning of the participants?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I've always believed that the true power behind the Peers program is really the parents and the caregivers and the social coaches that go through the program in tandem with our young adults, our adolescents, our preschoolers. They really, I think, are the real agent of change. And I think if they weren't involved in the program, I don't know that we would get these types of results. So just to clarify again, we always have a parent or some type of social coach that goes through the program with our participant to act as a social coach out in the real world. And this is so important because these are time limited programs. There's, maybe 16 weeks in length, maybe 20, once a week for maybe 90 minutes ish. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of life. And so it's nice to have that social coach out there in the real world, sort of supporting them. And the other nice thing about the social coach is they can help to expand the social opportunities of that young person, get them enrolled in extracurricular activities, help to support their efforts to have get-togethers. And really, when you include these social coaches in the program never ends. Right. So you've got that durability of research outcomes. And in fact, we've done long-term research on our program 1 to 5 years later, and our kids were doing just as well, if not better, across the board. And I completely attribute that to parent involvement, to social coaches. So, in terms of kind of proving that, we're actually looking at this more in detail in some of the research that we're doing right now with Peers for Careers and Peers for Dating. And Dr. Jasper knows all about this because she participates in those programs and co-facilitates the groups. But really there, what we're looking at is the coaching dynamic. In this case, all of our young adults are receiving the Peers for Careers or Peers for Dating curriculum. But the difference is they're randomized to either receive a career coach or a dating coach or no coach at all. And we're really looking at what is the impact of that coaching dynamic. So I think that that's really the power behind the program, but I think that this research will actually help to illuminate that a bit more.
I love that. Yeah, and I agree that that component that the program never ends, and it's so empowering to a lot of the participants and the families to know that it's not time limited to those 16 weeks. It never ends, and that's the thing about social skills; they never end, right? And I think that really touched upon one of the questions about long-term follow-up results. I know that we have some follow-up, long-term follow-up outcomes 1 to 5 years post-treatment intervention. One of the other questions, Dr. Laugeson, is I think really related to the concept of masking. So the question here is about how we center neurodiversity for topics such as changing a reputation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, and for those that aren't familiar with the term masking or camouflaging, there's, some debate, particularly in the autism community, particularly among self-advocates about, the need or the appropriateness of social skills training and whether that's a kind of masking or camouflaging. In other words, kind of pretending to be something that you're not. And so people will often ask, well, are we teaching people to camouflage or to mask? And I don't see it that way. First of all, the thing that we first have to identify is that we're only working with teens and young adults that are actually socially motivated, that want to be in our groups. And I mentioned that at the beginning of my talk. We don't include kids that don't want to be there or adults that don't want to be there. I don't even think that would be ethical to force social skills onto someone who doesn't want to learn them. It certainly wouldn't work. So that's the first thing, is that you actually have to want to learn the skills. But, think about this. We all use social skills all of the time, like throughout every day of our lives, right? Even right now, Jasper and I are using, I hope, pretty decent social skills, right? We're sort of facing the camera and sort of looking at each other and, maintaining attention. We're not doing other things, not walking around doing the laundry or something. We're using good social skills here. Jasper, I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like that's changing who I am as a person. I don't know. Do you think, do you feel different because you're, using your good social skills? No, probably not. But it is a choice, and we don't have to do that. If I want to get up and make a cup of tea right now, nobody's really stopping me from doing that. It's pretty inappropriate right at this very moment, but I could do that, and it's a choice. But, making the choice to use good social skills, I don't feel as though that's changing my personality. I'm not really camouflage. I don't feel like I'm camouflaging or masking who I am. Another example is like, you probably interacted with people that are just getting on your last nerve, right? And you're just finding them really annoying, but you don't necessarily tell them that they're getting on your last nerve and, show that you're annoyed. You might kind of, mask or camouflage, if you want to call it that. Does that change who you are as a person? No, you're just trying to use good social skills, but it's still a choice. And that's important. So that's kind of how I talk about that is, this has to be a choice. But the reality is that, for a lot of self-advocates on the autism spectrum in particular, they've often been kind of anti-social skills training in the past, but we've actually published with quite a few self-advocates, particularly from ASAN, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, and they're not really anti-peers, interestingly. And the reason they tell me why that is, why they'll publish papers and stuff with us, is that we have that choice, that we actually allow people to make the decision about whether they want to be there. And their thought process was that nobody should be forced to learn social skills, but if there are people that want to learn them, they should be allowed to learn them, right? It shouldn't have to be this hidden curriculum that, is like this mystery, that we can go ahead and decode the social world for people who want to learn those social skills.
Absolutely. And I think anecdotally, many of our participants just say, I just want to know how to do these things. I want to feel socially successful. And so I think that really highlights that social motivation aspect, which we know many of our participants really, really want to just understand how to better interact and feel socially successful. Let's see this other question here as how to help families that can't find a virtual or in-person extracurricular. I think this is about finding sources of friends and different kind of social activities for their teens.
Yeah, that has been the challenge during COVID is where to find these social activities and online groups. And, I think more and more schools right now, for example, are doing like in-person extracurriculars and that sort of thing. And I'm hoping that, the world is changing and we're getting back to a little bit more of that normalcy. But for those who are unable to participate in, those extracurriculars in person, some of the websites that I mentioned, like OutSchool and meetup.com might be good options right now. Again, meetup.com did not used to be for adolescents, but it's changed a lot during COVID. And now there are these online meetup groups. And I would just say that parents should be kind of monitoring their kids' involvement in these kinds of groups and, making sure that their kids aren't, meeting with people outside of those groups in person without some kind of parental supervision. And there's lots of ways to kind of be safe safe about doing those things. But those are sort of the two big websites that people have been using, but also, doing Google searches and seeing what's in your community, checking with your school to see what options are. The nice thing too about meetup.com is that you can start your own meetup groups. And so if there's a certain topic that kids are interested in, they want to start a group, I think that's fantastic, right? To do that and, see who sort of shows up. And people have to apply to be in these meetup groups. So you don't just get to show up. It's sort of, there's a process of application, but that's what I would really recommend. We also have, a document that we've been collecting data on for the last year and a half of where people are meeting other people. And Jasper, you've been a huge part of that too, our online resources. And so if people want to actually directly reach out to our clinic, we'd be happy to share with that document, but it's multiple pages of just ideas that people have come up with for doing online meetups, having online get-togethers, even dates. We're happy to share that resource.
Absolutely. And I think that many of these get-togethers and meetups it's rapidly evolving and changing depending on the location of where the participant is, their risk and safety concerns. And so we like to provide those resources. And as Dr. Laugeson said, please reach out to the clinic if anyone has any questions or would like access to that document. Our next question here, Dr. Laugeson, is do you have manualized guidance for cyberbullying in the teen curriculum, or is it just the slide decks?
No, we have manualized curriculum for handling cyberbullying in both our school-based adolescent program and also in our young adult program. So those are publicly available. It's also in the Science of Making Friends. The 2010 manual that was our very first peers curriculum had very limited information about cyberbullying because it was a relatively new phenomena in 2010. There, it was just starting to become a problem. And now fast forward to, 2021, this is a huge, problem for our kids. And so, yes, we have a number of strategies, which I'm happy to share, just kind of an overview, things like don't feed the trolls, right? So if you're being cyberbullied, probably shouldn't be reacting. They're looking for a reaction. So no reaction is probably best for cyberbullying. Maybe laying low online, maybe not posting a lot on social media if that's where you're being cyberbullied. Maybe consider blocking the bully, right? If they're in your friend network on social media or they're texting you harassing messages, just block them. Doesn't mean they can't find you, but it's a good strategy. No one strategy, by the way, works 100% of the time, but we have multiple strategies. We also tell them to use things like privacy settings, and they can, approve or block the tags and comments in social media if that's where they're being cyberbullied. Definitely, having other friends or even family members around the same age stick up for them is also very helpful. Cyberbullies are like in-person bullies, right? They don't want to pick on a group of people. They want to pick on someone who's alone. And then also things like saving the evidence, right? Now that doesn't mean I keep harassing and, embarrassing messages on my social media, but I could take a screenshot, right? And then save the evidence. Because if I have to report this and get help from sort of a supportive adult in school or wherever that might be, the first thing they're going to ask for is the evidence. Right. But if we do report this cyberbullying, getting help from a supportive adult, like a parent or, a teacher or a school administrator is always important. So that's my really crash course in the handling cyberbullying. There's a lot more to it, but I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Laugeson. And then this last question here is about provider training. So will you be offering any trainings for professionals for the preschool program?
Oh, great question. So I was literally in the midst of doing my, I do these writing retreats where I take like a week or two off at a time and work on manuals and, write for like 12 hours a day. And I was in the midst of doing that with Peers for Preschoolers when COVID happened, which just put, everything out of whack. And so that's been a little bit on hold with getting all of these telehealth materials together and all these new curriculum. But hopefully in the next, several months, we'll be able to kind of finish up the Peers for Preschoolers manual. It's written already, but writing a manual for publication is very different than using a manual in an actual treatment. And so that would be the first step towards doing the certified training for preschoolers. But I'm really hoping that in the next year, we will have a certified training seminar for Peers for Preschoolers. We're definitely really keen to do that. It's just a matter of kind of having the time to get all those pieces together. So stay tuned and feel free to, check out our website, or you can email us, check out our social media, but we will definitely be announcing that once those trainings are available.
Right. I think that highlights that there is such a demand for how to teach social skills and to continue ecologically valid social skills across the lifespan. I think in one of our parent groups the other day, one of the parents said, when can you teach peers for buying a house and peers for seniors? So they're waiting for that too, Dr. Laugeson.
Oh my goodness, there's so many social skills I know that we need. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. And I think if that's all the questions that are in our Q&A, and I'm noticing time, so we can go ahead and wrap things up. But thank you so much, Dr. Laugeson, for such an illuminating and relevant talk. I think that there's so much interest because we're all living online, right? And social skills, they translate regardless of if you're in person or having virtual interactions. So thank you for such a wonderful talk and for answering all those questions in our Q&A.
Well, thank you so much again for the kind introduction, for moderating the Q&A, and thank you to everyone for your attention. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and enjoy your rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.